He was a morbidly obese surgeon destined for an operating table and an early death. Now he's a rebel MD who is fabulously fit and fighting to make America healthy again. This is Stay Off My Operating Table with Dr. Philip Ovadia.
Hey folks, it's Stay Off My Operating Table with Dr. Philip Ovadia. We are joined today by a returning guest, and it's always fun to have these people back because we get to go deeper. Ben Azadi. Phil, I was watching Ben's sizzle reel, and he mentioned in the sizzle reel that he had gotten to interview and speak with some of the leading health specialists, metabolic health specialists in the world. And then in the B-roll, he's got photos. Ben, you know where I'm going with this.
I do.
And the very first photo is Ben Azadi standing with Dr. Philip Ovadia. I said to myself, that is a man of taste and style right there. Ben,
That's
welcome.
right. It's an
Yes.
honor. And it was right here in my studio. That was an amazing time. We've done 2 interviews now here at the studio.
Yeah, always fun times when I get to hang out with Ben in person. This one we're doing remotely, but and Ben probably doesn't give himself enough credit in that sizzle reel because Ben is really one of the experts and OGs when it comes to metabolic health. And he's been talking about this stuff for way longer than most people. Excited to be able to flip the tables again and pick his brain a little bit. Excited to talk about his upcoming book, which we'll certainly discuss, and just kind of hear what else he's been up to. Ben, maybe just a brief intro for anyone who didn't catch the first episode, and then we can get into it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Doc. Yeah, I'm somebody who suffered with metabolic dysfunction disease for 20 plus years growing up here in Miami, Florida, first generation American. And I followed a standard American diet, and I was really unhealthy as a kid. I was obese physically and mentally. I was addicted to video games, drugs, sugar food, emotional eater. And as an adult, back in 2007, I was 23 years old, young adult, but I was dealing with metabolic syndrome, high blood pressure, prediabetes, of course, depression. And the depression was so severe that I was literally on the internet looking for ways to end my life because I was tired of crying and being in pain every single day. I remember my body feeling so inflamed that my knees were hurting so bad to the point where if I would go to the shopping mall, for example, and if I knew I was walking for more than an hour, I would wear knee braces, I would wear back braces. I was pulling out my back. My whole body was just inflamed. And I wanted to give up. And I didn't go down that route, thank God, because I kept thinking about my mother and I didn't want to cause that harm and devastation to her. So it forced me to figure things out. And I took ownership and responsibility. I stopped blaming my genetics, my slow metabolism, my enabling family members. I had all the excuses in the world, like we all do, but those don't really serve us. And I took ownership. And the reason why I took ownership, it really started with a mindset shift first. I started to get into the books of Dr. Wayne Dyer and Bob Proctor and other legends, and they really helped me understand that the word responsibility, it's our ability to respond to life. And if your ability to respond to life is poor, you essentially get poor results. And that's exactly where I was. I was blaming everybody. But when your ability to respond to life is great, you get great results. So I took ownership and responsibility, and I started to move my body, eat real food, change my mindset, change my thoughts. And, fast forward 9 months after that decision to take responsibility, I lost 80 pounds of fat. I went from 250 pounds to as low as 170 pounds, 34% body fat at my highest to 6% body fat at my lowest. And it transformed my entire health, not just physically, but mentally. It's great if you want to have a six pack and all that. And I did achieve that back then, but a mental six pack is even more important. So a lot of those suicidal thoughts, depressive thoughts, and the mental fog that I had started to uplift and go away. And it really was interesting to me because I didn't know I could do this. I thought this is who I was going to be for the rest of my life, obese and just depressed. And I was able to achieve this in less than a year. And it excited me. And I got into the health space at that point. This was 17 years ago. Started my journey as a personal trainer, and along the way became an author and a speaker and all the cool things that, I get to do now. But, it really shows me that the body is built to heal itself. God built my body and all of our bodies to heal itself. And as long as we remove the interference, the body will heal itself. So I saw that firsthand. And, the cool thing about my story is that I kept the weight off. It wasn't a sort of calorie counting fad diet sort of approach where I just lost a ton of weight as fast as possible. No, I lost the weight, kept it off. And at age 40 right now, as I share this, I feel the healthiest I've ever felt in my entire life. And I share that because I hope it inspires others that might be going through a similar story, that your body could heal itself. We just need to find out what's been interfering with it, remove that, and then it'll go to work and heal your body.
That is so powerful. I want to get some details because you've lived it. And the way we do the way we deliver the best help to our listeners is by helping them see themselves and get hope. Excuse me. So I'd love to hear you describe, or at least explain for us real quickly, what you mean by when you say you were obese. How tall were you at 280? How tall are you at 280 pounds or 260 pounds?
6'2", 34% body fat. So classified as obese with the body fat percentage.
So if somebody looked at you, they'd know this guy's fat.
They would know I'm fat, but they probably wouldn't have known that I was obese because I carry the weight. I have a long torso. You'd probably look at me and be like, yeah, he's not healthy, he's overweight, but they didn't know I was obese. And I think there's a lot of people out there that are obese that you don't really see physically. And I was one of those people.
Yeah. Next thing, the depression. You didn't set out, if I understand your story, you didn't set out to heal your depression.
No, I just wanted to feel better. I just wanted to stop feeling like I was in pain all day. But yeah, the side effect was that the depression went away.
We've had a lot of reports of people whose mental status changed positively because they got physically healthy. And sometimes it's just a byproduct, sometimes it was the goal. But it's extraordinary to realize that fixing this one area of life cascaded across all of life. That's probably what you're talking about, isn't it?
100%, Jack. Absolutely. When you eat crappy food, you're going to have neuroinflammation. It's going to be hard to think positive thoughts and be in a good mood. I was inflamed, and I could say that, yeah, positive thinking. And yeah, we have 60,000 thoughts a day, and that is true. But when you're in such an inflamed state with neuroinflammation, it's really difficult. So as you change your diet, exercise, move more, eat real food, that neuroinflammation goes down, the inflammation in your body goes down, and it's easier to change your thoughts. It's easier to have a better mindset. It's easier to get out of that. I mean, it was so severe that I was suicidal. I was literally on the internet looking for ways to end my life. Here's what I searched for. How do you end your life the quickest way as possible, experiencing the least amount of pain? That's what I searched on Google. And every time I searched that, I just kept thinking about my mom, and I didn't want to do that to her. So that was the only thing that prevented me from taking my life. If it wasn't for my mom, I would have taken my life. I would not be with you today. And I'm actually grateful for all of that. All of that served the purpose. I really believe the pain that we went through, pain that we might be going through, it's a purpose. We turn that pain to a purpose. And it's hard to see that when you're going through it. It's easier when you look back in hindsight. But I'm grateful I went through all of that. And if I could do that, I hope it inspires so many other people out there watching or listening that they could do the same thing. You're incredible. You are created in God's image and likeness, and your body has an innate intelligence. It's the world's greatest physician. There's no chiropractor, doctor, or physician or anything, supplements, shot that could replace the healing capabilities that your body already has within it.
Yeah, so true. What interests me as you were going through your story is it started, kind of with mindset, right? You mentioned some of these, people like, Bob Proctor and stuff that are all about mindset. Maybe talk a little bit about how that led you to eating differently, because most people, when they read those books and listen to these people, they think about their financial life, and maybe they think about, kind of their day-to-day organizational things. It doesn't intuitively necessarily lead to, let me think about what I'm eating.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. I'm so glad you brought that up. This is my favorite thing to talk about. In chapter 10 of my book, Metabolic Freedom, it's all about this. It's all about how your thoughts influence your metabolism and health. And I think it's the most important piece, honestly. Nutrition's important, exercise, carnivore, I love all that. But I think if you don't have this piece, none of that will work to the extent you want it to work. So for me, I started to research something called paradigms and self-image. And Bob Proctor used to talk about this. So we essentially all have a self-image of ourselves. We view ourselves a certain way. And essentially, this is from our childhood, the first 7 years that we were brought up. So our parents, our friends, our school teachers, the first 7 years, they develop this paradigm, which the paradigm definition is it's a multitude of habits that are right into our subconscious mind. It means we just do it on autopilot. And then we develop this self-image of ourselves. So for me, my self-image of myself was I'm an obese man. First, it was an obese kid, then it was an obese man. I'm a fat man. I'm not popular. It was all this like negative sort of self-talk. And I noticed that when I started to make a conscious decision to change my nutrition, move my body, I was battling the subconscious paradigm, and I kept doing things to sabotage myself because I believe we cannot outperform the self-image we have of ourselves. So when I got into the work of Bob Proctor, he introduced me to a gentleman named Maxwell Maltz, who has a book
Oh,
from the
yeah.
1960s. Yeah.
Psycho-cybernetics.
Cybernetics. Exactly, Jack. And this explains it perfectly well. Psycho-cybernetics, meaning cybernetic instrument. Human beings are what's called a cybernetic instrument, but airplanes are also what's called a cybernetic instrument. So the way this works with airplanes, and I'll apply it to human beings, when an airplane takes off, let's say from Miami, where I'm at, to let's say Los Angeles, California, the pilots, they trigger autopilot. So whenever there's turbulence, whenever the plane goes off course, the autopilot course corrects so they get to their destination. Essentially, the pilots could come to the back of the plane, hang out with you, and it'll get there safely. I'm glad they don't do that though. So it course corrects. It's a cybernetic instrument. Human beings do the same thing, meaning what I found and what I've seen now with thousands of people that I've taken through my academy, when we don't change the self-image, if the self-image is that of an overweight person, we will start to make a conscious decision to maybe take action with the carnivore diet or intermittent fasting or whatever it is, and we'll start to lose weight. But if our self-image is that of an obese person, we will course correct back to match the self-image. We'll find ourselves at McDonald's. We'll find ourselves in the pantry eating the Oreos, eating the cookies to gain the weight back. And I kept doing that to myself until I started to change the self-image. I needed to reprogram that paradigm. And it wasn't until I did that that I started to actually achieve sustainable results. And I think a lot of us do that. We identify with our diseases and diagnosis. I have this autoimmune disease. I have cancer. And then we make a conscious decision to do something about it. But if our self-image has identified with that diagnosis and disease or symptom, we'll keep matching that. We'll keep doing things to go back. And what I discovered is that there's only two ways to change the self-image, the paradigm, only two ways. The first way is an emotional impact. 9 times out of 10, an emotional impact is a negative experience. It's a near-death experience. It's the loss of a loved one. It's, in a severe car accident, almost losing your life. It's a scary diagnosis. It changes the way you think. It changes your paradigm. And that's one way to change the self-image. Now, ideally, you don't want to use that as the route because it's usually negative and it's unpredictable. The second way, the only other way to change the self-image, which is the preferred way, is the constant spaced repetition of that new idea. Meaning, what I did and what I actually have in my book, chapter 10, is an affirmation of the new self-image where you read it.
I want a constant spaced repetition of the new idea. Okay.
Yes. You want to imprint it enough times in your mind where it goes from the conscious mind and it replaces the old belief in the subconscious mind. And the only way to do that is the way that it was built. Constant spaced repetition. That's the way that you created that paradigm. That's the way you're going to change it. It's the only way. So what I did and what I recommend in the book and recommend to my students is to write down that new self-image and write it in the present tense. It's right here. I carry this with me all the time. I'm so happy and grateful now that the perfect health I seek is now seeking me. I remove any blockages between us. I'm at my perfect health, perfect weight. I feel great and I look fantastic, right? You could reword that any way you want, but you keep repeating that enough times. And to some people, it sounds crazy and woo, but I'm telling you, once you get that idea locked into the subconscious mind, now you have a new self-image. Now you don't course correct and sabotage yourself and sabotage your goals. So that was the biggest piece for me and my students. It was so important that I put it in the book. I put the affirmation in the book. And when I lecture now, I even have people writing down their new self-image. And that could be applied, by the way, to everything, not just weight
Yeah.
loss but finances and everything, relationships. Yeah, I think that is a huge part that's missing from a lot of people trying to get well.
One of
Yeah, it
my
definitely is. And, I see it all the time. And I talk about, you got to know your why. And, that's what's going to keep you. And this is a great framing for that of, what you want to be, what you believe yourself to be. And that's, what you will become.
one of my good friends here in town used to train with this Taekwondo guy who trained, I guess, apparently world-class athletes. And he just recently told me that his coach said to him over and over again, "You will never outperform your self-image.
Mm,
You will never outperform your self-image." I
wow.
thought that was so incredibly powerful.
It's the truth in every aspect of your life, not just health. If you have a self-image of somebody who makes a certain amount of income each month and you try to earn more income, you're not going to do it until you change the self-image. You might have a good month, and then the following month you go back down. You actually are negative to match that certain income level that you set in the
Course
self-image.
correct.
Course correct. That's right. We do it all the time with our health. It really works incredible. Our thoughts are so powerful. They are really powerful. I start the chapter 10 sharing a story about to illustrate how powerful the thoughts are. And I'd love to share that story real quick with you guys here. Yeah. So
All
it's
right.
it's from the 1960s. And I got Bob Proctor originally shared this story. So I'm giving him credit on it, but it was in the newspapers in the 1960s. And it was about a railroad employee. He worked at a train station and he worked inside of a refrigerator cart. And he was working late one evening and he didn't notice that the time was flying by and he was beyond the time he was supposed to check out. So it was around 11 p.m. and all of his coworkers had clocked out and left for the night. So he tried to exit the refrigerator cart, but he was locked inside and he's banging, but everybody's gone. Nobody could hear him. And he was starting to panic because he knew that nobody was going to be there for another 7 or 8 hours. And it was cold. So he started to write on the wall, kind of documenting his night, his journey. So around 12 a.m., he wrote, "I'm locked in here. Not sure how I'm going to get out anytime soon. I'm freezing." 1 a.m., he would write, "Still cold. Can't seem to keep myself warm. Constant shivering." 2 a.m., "Freezing. I keep seeing the temperature apparatus drop. I don't know how I'm going to make it tonight." Now, the next morning, around 8 a.m., 7, 8 a.m., his coworkers clock in. They open up that refrigerator cart and they see the man dead, hypothermia. He froze to death. The interesting thing about the story is that the temperature apparatus was malfunctioning for days and it never dropped below 55 degrees Fahrenheit. The man thoughts influenced him to actually die. His thoughts created death, right? And if our thoughts could do that, can our thoughts also heal the body? The answer is 100% yes, it can. And Dr. Bruce Lipton, who's a world-renowned cell biologist, has proven this. Your thoughts are a frequency that communicate with your DNA nucleus for that nucleus to produce certain proteins. If it's an angry, hateful, resentful thought, it's going to produce inflammatory proteins, which shortens your telomeres, damages your DNA, and shortens your lifespan. But if it's a loving thought, an abundant thought, a happy thought, a grateful thought, same signal sent, but now it's anti-inflammatory proteins, your telomeres are protected, your DNA is protected, and you extend your lifespan. So if we have 60,000 thoughts a day, which that's what psychiatrists estimate that we do, that means we have 60,000 opportunities every day to put the body in this healing anti-inflammatory state. And I think, no pun intended, that's the greatest health tip that I could ever learn or ever share with anybody. Your thoughts are the greatest biohack that you have that you could use today.
I love that something that on the surface sounds so woo does in fact have extraordinary, what's the word I'm looking for? There's evidence. We can test it in the laboratory. We can see it. It's repeatable. It's falsifiable. Yeah. Okay. Your book talks about removing obstacles. I can't remember the phrase you used.
Interference.
Removing interference. Go deep on that.
Yeah, this is right up Dr. Philip Ovadia's alley right here. I've learned so much from you, Dr. Phil. First of all, let's look at the state of the United States, right? In 2016, Mayo Clinic put out a study. First of all, the study was looking to determine how many Americans live an active, healthy lifestyle, and they based it off of four characteristics, four criteria. Number one, they don't smoke cigarettes. Number two, they exercise moderate to vigorous exercise or activity for up to 150 minutes total per week. Number three, they eat a healthy diet, which is classified as a minimally processed diet. And number four, if they're a male, they have a body fat percentage under 20% and female under 30%. Out of those four criteria, only 2.7% of Americans in the study fit that criteria. Very small percentage. Then in 2018, the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill put out a study showing around 88% of Americans are exhibiting metabolic dysfunction. So only 12% of Americans are what they consider metabolically healthy. And then in 2022, another study showing it's actually closer to around 93% of Americans being metabolically unhealthy. Why? We have so much information, arguably the most information we've ever had before, but we're drowning in information and starving for actually true wisdom and truth, like the stuff you share here on the podcast. The first thing to remove is the interference. And I think insulin is the biggest piece here. I believe insulin, and I make the case for this in the book, and Doc, you talk about this a lot. Insulin is the first domino to fall that triggers the metabolic diseases, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, PCOS, of course, heart disease and cancer. Insulin, we know, is a growth factor, and insulin is a very important energy sensor and hormone unless you're calling insulin all the time. So what is the average American doing? They're eating 250 grams of carbohydrates per day. Insulin spike, glucose and insulin spike. But not only that, they're eating along the entire day. There's a study I put in the book from Dr. Don Klum that showed the average American is eating 17 to 23 times per day in the form of meals and snacks and meals and snacks, 17 to 23 times per day. That's interference. That's glucose and insulin spikes, glucose and insulin spikes. We want to remove that interference, right? We could do that, of course, with a low carbohydrate diet. That could be a keto diet, that could be a carnivore diet, but you lower glucose and insulin so significantly with a low carbohydrate keto diet. And then you want to implement meal timing, intermittent fasting. That's a great way to have a certain window where you have your meals. Maybe it's 8 hours, you have your eating window, and then 16 hours you're fasting. That's just one way to do it. So that's the first interference that I would remove. I would stop spiking glucose and insulin, because insulin will be elevated, and the studies show, for 6 to 14 years. This is according to the Whitehall study and others. Insulin will be elevated for 6 to 14 years before your blood sugars change at all, meaning your A1C and your fasting blood sugars, because you're just so busy. Your pancreas is so busy just shouting out to produce insulin to clear that glucose out of the bloodstream that your blood sugars stay fine. So if you're testing your A1C and glucose and it looks fine, and you're not testing your fasting insulin, that's a big piece that you're missing here. Once your insulin receptor sites get burned out from all the shouting of the insulin, the pancreas, then your blood sugars change so dramatically. Then you have type 2 diabetes, and we know what happens. It opens up heart disease, cancer. I mean, it's crazy what type 2 diabetes leads to. And one more piece here. With the A1C, which of course is the 3-month average of our blood sugars, there's a study that shows, this is making the point of how destructive high levels of blood sugar are. There's a study that shows if your A1C is 7.5% or higher, every single year it's at that level, they estimate 100 days come off the lifespan. So if it's at that level for 15 years, that's 4 years that come off your lifespan. That is how destructive high levels of blood sugar and insulin are. So that's the first point the first step to remove the interference. Lower your insulin levels, and then you kind of go from there.
I think it's worthwhile to highlight this fasting insulin versus fasting glucose. I know you guys who work in this field, you know it, but I don't think this is but maybe the second or third time I've heard this mentioned, Phil. It doesn't mean it hasn't been, but I'm really starting to grasp how important it is to have that tested because of what Ben just said. Your insulin will be elevated 6 to 14 years before it starts to show up as excess glucose in your blood. Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
I,
and so unfortunate that it gets tested so rarely. And it's one of the things I continue to, have pushback on when I'm talking to people and I say, go, tell your doctor, ask your doctor for this test. And their doctor just won't do it. They refuse. And it baffles me, honestly, these days. I mean, it doesn't, because I understand, it's not part of the paradigm that your doctor has been trained on, and they don't know what to do with it and how to interpret it. But I agree with Ben that it's the key, right? It's the one that unlocks, metabolic health and helps us to measure it and understand it.
Yeah, and I know you test for it and you recommend that I've heard you talk about it before. Most people are not even aware of it. They're not aware, oh, I test my fasting glucose, but they think it's the same thing as fasting insulin. It's not. And the cool thing about fasting insulin, it's a very cheap test. So even if your insurance doesn't cover it, it's very cheap. There are some companies also offering finger pricks as well, so you could do it at the convenience of your home. That's one piece of the puzzle here, but when you get your results for fasting insulin, that's the second piece, because the reference range is going to be between 3 and 25 typically. And that's the standard reference range, meaning what the average person has, comparing it to the average person who has taken the test. You don't want to be an average person because most people are sick. The goal is to have your fasting insulin in the single digits. 3 to 7 is considered optimal, but single digits fasting insulin means you're doing something right. If you see it over 10, between 10 and 20, you're showing signs of insulin resistance. Over 20, you have insulin resistance. But your standard doctor, if it's 22, which is insulin resistance, will not flag it as such because it's still in that reference range. And I know, Phil, you probably want to add to that.
Yeah, no, just another great point that you're right on that. Even people who are getting it done may not be getting it interpreted correctly. And it adds another layer of challenge here. And it's just another example of how people need to take charge of their health and need to, take this initiative and either push your doctor or, if your doctor won't do it, like you said, it's a inexpensive test. You can go to many websites, order it yourself. And it really can be, people are always asking me, like, what's the most important test? And when it comes to blood testing, I usually circle back to fasting insulin because it leads us to all the other things, right? We talk about, quality of your cholesterol particles, and we talk about, inflammation and all of this, but it kind of starts with insulin first and foremost. I think that's the big one. Talk a little bit about the title of the book, Metabolic Freedom. Why'd you kind of select that one? Freedom maybe isn't usually associated in people's minds with, diet strategies. So I'm interested to hear why you picked that title.
Yeah, great question. My last name, Azadi, translates to freedom in Farsi. My parents are from Iran, and that's actually the translation of my last name, freedom. I just love the word. I love freedom, love living in America, which is the greatest country in the world where we have freedom. But the reason why I put it as the title of the book is because I think we all want this metabolic freedom. Essentially is metabolic flexibility, the ability to have a metabolism that burns whatever substrate is available. That could be carbs if you choose, that could be protein, fat, that could be your own body fat, but it uses it for energy. You burn fat, you lower inflammation, you feel great. Unfortunately, like I mentioned, 93% of Americans are metabolically handcuffed. They're not metabolically free. They are relying on a hit of glucose and insulin from a snack or food just to sustain energy levels. They're in constant sugar burning mode. That's not metabolic freedom. That's the opposite. God designed us to be metabolically free. Babies that are born into this world are natural fat burners. I mean, breast milk has saturated fat and cholesterol and it actually helps the baby's brain develop when it's in ketosis. The baby is in ketosis when they are breastfeeding. So I think that, and what I share in the book is that those 93% of Americans that are metabolically unhealthy, they're in what I call a keto deficiency. They just forgot how to burn fat. And keto is the first step. Getting fat adapted, being in ketosis is the first step that unlocks this metabolic freedom. So I just love the words metabolic and freedom. And that's what I went with. I loved it so much that I changed my podcast name from Keto Camp Podcast to Metabolic Freedom Podcast.
What are some of the other big interferences? And by big, I mean common.
For sure, it's got to be the seed oils, the vegetable oils, the damaged fats, inflammatory fat. These are an 80% of our food supply in the United States. They're touted as being, heart healthy. The American Heart Association puts their friendly stamp of approval on them, and they're the opposite of heart healthy. Dr. Philip Ovadia talks a lot about them as well. And the reason why this is a big interference is because it's everywhere. It's definitely at fast food restaurants, but it's also at fancy restaurants. It's at your Whole Foods hot food bars. These are seed oils that are the reason why they're so bad for us is because the way that they are processed. If we just simply study the biochemistry of seed oils and just the way they look under a microscope, they're called polyunsaturated fatty acids. Poly means many. So these seed oils contain many double bonds. The more double bonds a fat has, the more reactive it is to oxygen, heat, and pressure. What do they process these oils with? Oxygen, heat, and pressure. So it oxidizes these fats. It turns them rancid. They could be high quality, but once they're processed, they're low quality. They're rancid. And then we heat them up even more, oxidize these fats even more, and they go in our body and they disrupt our cell membrane health, our mitochondria. They create inflammation. And there's a study from Dr. Martin Grutfeld that Dr. Kate Shanahan referenced in her book, Dark Calories, that I also put in my book, that shows that the average 5-ounce serving of French fries from McDonald's that are fried in these vegetable oils produces the same amount of aldehydes, which are carcinogenic, as smoking tobacco cigarettes, meaning they said it's in the study, it's almost equivalent to 25 tobacco cigarettes. So there are 25 French fries and 5 ounces of French fries from McDonald's. That's equivalent to 25 tobacco cigarettes. In other words, one French fry cooked in vegetable oil, eaten, is equivalent to smoking a tobacco cigarette. That's how inflammatory they are. And they stay in your body for a very long time. The half-life for these fats are 680 days, about 2 years. They are just creating inflammation. They're poisoning the mitochondria, and they're everywhere. So what we want to do, and I make the case about this in the book, we want to remove these vegetable oils, which are canola oil, corn oil, cottonseed oil, soybean oil, sunflower oil, safflower oil, rice bran oil, and grapeseed oil. We want to replace those, remove those, do an audit in your pantry, and swap those out for saturated fats and monounsaturated fats. Butter, ghee, beef tallow, coconut oil, lard, avocado oil, olive oil. These are much, much healthier for you. And when you go to a restaurant, ask the server, what do you use to cook your food in? And they're typically going to say it's a vegetable oil. So and I've been to dinner with you, Phil, I tell the server, I'm allergic to vegetable oils. As a matter of fact, I have a seed oil allergy card that I have somewhere here that I actually show the server that shows that I'm allergic to these bad fats. Can you use a healthier alternative? Can you grill with them? So that's the main thing here. You want to replace them with healthier fats. You're going to notice a difference right away with energy levels, inflammation, better sleep. You're going to lose some weight at the same time. So yeah, that's something that's really huge in our space.
You've been in this space now, you said, for, over 15 years that you've been spreading this message. Here we are, as we're recording this, first week in March, 2025. RFK was, confirmed a couple of weeks ago. as of, I believe it was 2 or 3 days ago, the chain Steak and Shake said they're no longer using vegetable and seed oils and instead are cooking their French fries in tallow. What's your outlook? What do you see happening there on the large scale? Do you think this message is finally getting through?
Man, it's so exciting, huh? We were talking about this when you were here. This is
Yeah.
before all this has happened. Yeah, I do believe it's finally getting through. It's becoming mainstream. It's very exciting. Thank God. I mean, you and I have been here in the trenches preaching this message for so long, and it's so, we went from the bottom to the top now. We're really actually making a difference here. So it's cool to see Steak and Shake and other restaurants will follow suit. I'm a little cautious though with these restaurants switching to beef tallow. I want to make sure it's 100% beef tallow. For example, Buffalo Wild Wings, they claim they use beef tallow, but when I looked into it, yeah, they do, but then it has a whole bunch of other, it's not 100% beef tallow. It has a whole bunch of other inflammatory stuff in it. But I think Steak and Shake is going to use 100% beef tallow. So just be aware. I mean, ask the question, is it 100% beef tallow? Make sure it's not cut with something else. And I do think that this is going to be a trend we see these days. Like Chipotle, I'm hoping does the same thing. I'm hoping a lot of these big restaurants do the same thing. And it's going to be really us that force this. And that's why I use the seed oil carb. That's why when I go to restaurants, I don't make an exception with seed oils. I tell them I'm allergic. And when people start doing that, we start to create a demand. And then the restaurant owner starts to think, wow, that's like the seventh person today that said they don't want seed oils. Maybe we should have an alternative. So we are going to create that demand at the same time. We can't just say, yeah, go RFK, do your thing. No, we have to do it as well. So I'm excited for the whole MAHA movement. We need to change. This is not political. This is just our cells do not see red or blue. It doesn't see color. It sees health. We just want to be healthy. And what we've seen so far is the complete opposite. So I'm excited for it. I know you are. I know you were in DC and all that good stuff. So yeah, it's really cool to see what's happening right now.
Yeah, no, ultimately, I think, voting with your wallet is the power that we all have. And, the more, like you said, that people are asking for this, the industry will respond. I do share your skepticism, right? We always have to be a little careful here because, for instance, we've both seen what has happened with the keto label on foods these days. And you can go into the supermarket and you can get, stuff that's labeled keto. And, technically it probably meets some definition of keto, but it's not going to be beneficial for your health. And oftentimes, they're using things like vegetable and seed oils in there, to keep within the sort of keto, nutritional definition. We have to remain vigilant, but I am optimistic. I've been thinking about when it comes to the restaurant industry that, for 50 plus years, red meat has been demonized. And yet, for some reason, the most popular restaurants in the US are burger places. And, I'd probably put steak places, pretty high on that list as well. And you think about why would they have continued this, and the only reason is because that's what people want to eat, right? They want to eat red meat. And, these businesses stay in business. And I think we can use that same force, right? Ultimately, if people understand why they should want this, and this gets back to what you were talking about earlier, why seed oils are so bad, why it's interfering with their health, then, they'll demand this. And the other thing that I think makes this a realistic outcome is it's actually what they used to do, right? All these restaurants used tallow and lard and, animal fats before they switched to the seed oils. That was an experiment. The experiment has failed. So all we're really asking is let's just go back to how we used to do it.
That's right. Including McDonald's. They used to fry in beef tallow.
Yep.
And people say that's why their fries were so delicious. I, I'm torn because I know potatoes are pretty high carb, and it's not really hard for me to live without potatoes. But I have so many extraordinary memories, positive emotion attached to sitting and eating McDonald's French fries with my buddies in high school. But this was apparently back before, I know it was before they started using seed oil. So I'm ambivalent about advocating for a return to tallow with the French fries because I I don't need the additional temptation. Know what I mean? What are some of the other common interferences that folks
There's a
have?
chapter, yeah, there's a chapter on environmental toxins and what that does to create metabolic dysfunction. We know there's a category of toxins called obesogens. There's also a newer classification of toxins I don't think most people know about called diabetogens. So
Really?
I'll unpack both of them. So
Okay.
obesogens are these chemicals in our environment, our food, water supply, air supply that enter the body and they trigger larger fat cells. And it does this, the body does it very purposeful. The number one priority for the body is survival. It wants to survive. The innate intelligence wants to survive, even if that means creating disease and cancer later. I'm going to do anything possible to survive in the moment. So when we have toxins enter the body, it activates a pathway called PPAR gamma, which simply just shuttles those toxins out of the bloodstream into our adipocytes, our fat cells, because there's room there. And if there's not enough room, the body, the innate intelligence, the metabolism will increase those fat cells and even create new fat cells for those toxins to live in. That is because the solution to pollution is dilution. And you could dilute these toxins by putting them into your fat cells. So that's how they create obesity, weight gain, et cetera. They're called obesogens. We see them, yes, in plastics, and that's a huge issue these days, but also heavy metals. Glyphosate could be in that category. These are huge hormone disruptors. They're called endocrine disrupting hormones. So that's one classification. And then I'll give some tips on how to mitigate that. But the second classification are called diabetogens. And there's several studies showing that there's a classification of toxins that when they enter your body, they trigger beta cell dysfunction in the pancreas, which creates high blood sugar levels, prediabetes, and eventually diabetes. They classified them as diabetogens, which is crazy because that never existed until the last few years. And this one study I read showed that type 2 diabetes, about 33% of them is from these diabetogens. It's chemical induced diabetes versus just
Good
poor
God.
nutrition.
What
33%.
what kind of chemicals are we talking about?
These are more of the big boys, the heavy metals, mercury, lead, and aluminum, more of the super toxins that are causing this. You know, for example, like silver amalgam fillings is a way to get exposed to mercury. It's about 50 to 55% mercury. Certain vaccinations have heavy metals in them. We get lead from our mom. So these are more of the super toxins, the heavy metals. And then, of course, you know, there's jet fuel coming down and there's our crops are being contaminated as well. All this to say is that we have an issue. We live in the most toxic world than ever before. And I even go into Italy, for example, and I give the comparison of Italy, which has a fraction of the diabetes than we do in the United States. They have a fraction of the obesity that we do here in the United States. Yet they don't exercise more. They don't have more gyms in Italy. We have way more gyms here. Yes, they walk more, but what's the difference in Italy? In 2016, they started to create higher regulations and started to outlaw and ban a lot of these toxins in the food supply, glyphosate, red dyes, and they were really becoming strict with it. And I think that's the biggest difference. They have a longer lifespan than us as well. So I think as we start to flesh out these toxins with the whole MAHA movement, get rid of glyphosate, really protect our food supply, that's going to put a dent in obesity and also diabetes. And there's some simple things we can do. Drink out of glass bottles, like I have here, instead of plastic bottles. Don't use plastic cutting boards. Plastic cutting boards. Use wooden cutting boards. Don't use plastic Tupperware. Use a glass Tupperware. Don't grab, and I share all this in the book, don't grab the cash register receipt at the supermarket because studies show it contains about 1,000 times greater the amount of BPA than in canned food. And when you touch that receipt, it goes into your bloodstream. So say no to cash register receipts and then keep your detox pathways open. Exercise, sauna, do different things for liver support. So there's a lot of things we can do, but toxins are a big issue these days. I've seen it firsthand, especially with diabetics.
Yeah, this is certainly something that I would say I've, learned more about incorporating more into our practice, just that it's, the food is about more than just the macros. And, we talk about carbs and, how problematic carbs can be. But I think a large part of why the carbs are so problematic is because of what's being put on the wheat and, and on the vegetables. And, many people, right, point to that example of, they go to Europe and they go to Italy and eat the pasta, or they go to France and they eat the, the baguettes and the pastries, and yet they don't, have the same effects that they seem to have over here in the US. And we've just allowed so many toxins at this point into our food supply. And we have an assault from everywhere. We've had a couple of recent guests on talking about how ubiquitous mold is in our environment. And,
Yes.
this is another toxin, the mycotoxins that are produced by the mold that, again, are just attacking the system. And in a lot of ways, it just becomes this, constant barrage, and maybe you can't point to one in isolation, but they all add up ultimately and ruin our metabolic health. But I think we are figuring out the ways to counteract this. And the good news is, you can do something about it. You can take agency and take charge of your health and start paying attention to these things. And like you said, the body is amazing. It can heal itself if you just get out of its way and you stop with all the interference.
Spot on.
Excuse me. You started off by talking about how we're overwhelmed with information. And I'll be frank, what you just described is a little bit overwhelming. I'm assuming the way that would make sense to attack these issues is from what's going to give you the most bang for your buck at the beginning. My intuition tells me, not any research or science that I have, but just my intuition tells me the place to start is with your food, what you're putting in your body. Guys, you're the experts. I'm just asking. Is that the most, is that the low-hanging fruit? Is that where you can see the most impact in the shortest amount of time?
The easiest step, first step. I know it's a lot of information, and the book does have a 30-day plan at the end where we take all the information we've learned, and then I give you a step-by-step plan. Makes it very easy for you to follow. Because you're right, you get all this information, it can feel overwhelming, and it is. We talked a lot about this a lot today, but I do have a 30-day plan to put it all together for you. But to answer your question, I do
Yay.
believe, yeah, I do believe changing your food is the first thing. Simple thing. Look up the clean 15 versus the dirty dozen, right? That just shows you the dirty dozen are the top foods according to the environmental working group that have the most pesticides, glyphosate in it, and avoid those. Stick with the clean 15 and get organic as much as possible. Eat more fat and protein, less carbohydrates. These simple little swaps go a long way. You don't have to make, and here's the point. You don't have to make all these changes all at once, nor should you, because that's going to be just so much to keep up with. I really believe in the mentality of one tweak a week. And that's the way I designed the book, the 30-day plan, to make some simple changes here and there, get some momentum, go on to the next habit, get some momentum. When we start to think about diabetogens and obesogens and, of course, mold toxicity and all the things it could feel like, oh my gosh, I should just not even do anything. There's nothing I can do.
Yeah.
So just start with your nutrition. Start to lower your carbohydrates, eat more protein and fat, eliminate snacking, and then go from there. That would be my advice. But Phil, I'm curious to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, no, those are all great thoughts. And, I end up saying the same thing in slightly different ways. We talk about the pillars of metabolic health, right? What you eat, what you do, how you sleep, and how you manage your stress. But I always come back to, what you eat first and foremost, because that's the one that if you're not getting that one, you have a real hard time, compensating with the others. I've seen plenty of people who have only gotten that, what they eat, and they really, might not pay a whole lot of attention to the other things, and they still end up doing pretty well. So I always come back to what you eat first. And, I think we've just discussed more and more reason why that is kind of the truth. You can point to all these different aspects of what we eat, whether it's the macros, the amount, the toxins, the frequency, it all adds up, but it all comes back to what we eat first and foremost. And I think that's what we need to start with. And again, on the big scale, I'm excited to see that it is being focused on, again, it's being focused on in a better way, right? Because I guess, we have had a focus on what we eat for a long time, right? We've had these food guidelines, but they were just so disastrous.
They were just wrong.
Yeah, just wrong. And so now we gotta, and that's part of the challenge, right? Because, that set the stage that people now believe that what we eat is not important, because when they've been told, just eat this food and you'll get better, and they don't, they get worse, right? That kind of, in a lot of ways, poisons their thinking against, no, it's not what I eat. I tried eating healthy and I got worse. And that's a little bit of an extra challenge that I think we need to overcome these days, is getting people to understand it is what you eat. It's just not what you've been told to eat.
Mhm.
Really important point.
You said several times, Ben, you talked several times about the body's innate ability to heal. The body wants to heal itself. At the headline level, that's a really cool thing to say, but I suspect the devil's in the details. Can you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, of course. If you think about the average lifespan in the US, what is it, 77 years, I think, the average lifespan. I think women are a little bit longer than men, but the average is 77-ish. We were created to live to around 120, 120 years, right? So we're doing about, what is that, 40 plus years of damage to our body.
Two-thirds of the lifespan.
Two-thirds of the lifespan of damage because we have so much interference. But as long as if you give the body the building blocks it needs, it will do all the things you need it to do. Meaning, we don't have, Dr. Phil, we don't have heart disease because of lack of statins and medication. We don't have obesity because of, lack of insulin or whatever it is. We have it because we're taking hits. We're taking too many hits. We're not allowing the body to heal itself. And the body will give us, the innate intelligence will give us a symptom as a way to communicate with us that something we're eating, something we're drinking, something in our environment is creating interference. So I will show you a symptom, the body's check engine light, to pay attention to remove that interference so I can start to function optimally. But we've been brainwashed to believe the symptoms are a bad thing and we need to go take a medication for high blood pressure, get on insulin for high blood sugar levels, or whatever it is. But it's not the medication that we need, it's what's caused the symptom. And symptoms could be so far removed from the actual cause. And to give an example, and I talk about this in the book, somebody could go out and just pig out. They could have pizza, beer, ice cream, a whole bunch of food, and just gorge themselves. They'll wake up the next morning, they'll have symptoms. Maybe it's acid reflux, maybe it's diarrhea, they're bloated, they're puffy. They'll make an appointment with their conventional allopathic doctor and start listing all those symptoms. The doctor will listen to them and say, no worries, I will write you a prescription for antacid, antiflatulence, etc. Go to the pharmacy and pick it up. But if the doctor would have just asked, what did you eat last night? And the patient would have listed all these foods. The doctor would have said, don't do that again. No symptoms, right? That's what I mean by remove the interference, the body will heal itself. You won't have symptoms if you're doing all the right things. So look at symptoms as a gift. Look at it as your body's check engine light. It's your body's way of communicating to you. We've been brainwashed to believe it's a bad thing, but in reality, it's an opportunity to discover healing. It's an opportunity to discover the cause of that symptom.
I love that analogy. Symptoms are like your body's check engine light on the dashboard. And my experience with allopathic doctors the last 15 years that I use them, and I quit 20 years ago. There should be we should get a medal like alcoholics for how long they've gone without drinking. How long since I've seen an allopath? No, the last guy did exactly that. I went in with horrible gastric reflux, and he gave me a prescription for a pill that would make my body stop producing too much acid. He basically, in automotive terms, he gave me a way to disable the check engine light.
That's right.
Yep.
Didn't
when
get
you
to the
say it that
cause.
way, it's just so blindingly obvious. That's incredibly stupid. But that's what this pill did. It said, oh, you've got a check engine light. Here, I'll snip that circuit for you so that nasty check engine light won't bother you anymore.
Exactly it. That's exactly what he did. And that's happening all the time.
Yeah, way too often. If people want to be able to understand why the check engine light is on and how to actually fix it, I think Ben's new book is a great resource for that. So again, it's called Metabolic Freedom. When this releases, it will be on pre-order in all the usual places, and encourage people to go out and pre-order it. I know that really helps the algorithm. Ben, maybe if you want to say a little bit more about the book and where else people can connect with you and find out all the great stuff that you're doing.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, it's an honor to come back. I really appreciate it. I always love our conversations. The book is out May 13th. You could get it on pre-order right now. The foreword for the book is written by Dr. Mindy Pelz, and I am really excited about the book. It's going to change so many lives. It's presented into two different parts, the problems, the solutions, and then it gives you that 30-day plan. If you go to metabolicfreedombook.com, we're giving away a free gift for anybody who pre-orders it. We're giving away an entire course on the metabolism that I developed, along with exclusive interviews that I did with Dr. Jason Fung, Megan Ramos, Dr. Daniel Pompa, Cynthia Thurlow, and Gary Brecka. So these are interviews that you could not find anywhere else but this course, and you get it for free when you go to metabolicfreedombook.com. It's available on hardcover, Audible. I just finished the narration for the Audible, and also it's going to be available on Kindle. So that's where I would love your audience to go. If this resonated with your audience, that would be amazing.
Very good. We will make sure all the links are in the show notes so y'all can get their pre-order and get the free course. This has you bet. It's always fun to talk with you, Ben. This has been let's start over. What's the name of this show, Phil?
I think it's something about an operating table.
Something about an operating table. That's right. Stay off my operating table with Dr. Philip Ovadia. Our guest has been Ben Azadi. Thanks for joining us. I apologize that your co-host here is such an idiot, but I guess you get what you pay for. We'll talk to y'all next time.
Chances are you wouldn't be listening to this podcast if you didn't need to change your life and get healthier. So take action right now. Book a call with Dr. Ovadia's team. One small step in the right direction is all it takes to get started. Contact us at ifixhearts.com/talk. That's ifixhearts.com/talk.